When I lived in India around 1997, 1998, around there, I got chatting with this lovely elderly Indian man about home. He told me that he'd lived outside of India for a few years when he was younger and how much he'd missed his homeland while he was gone. And when I said that I didn't really miss my country, he was quite taken aback. He looked at me and said, "Oh my, but one's mother and homeland are pieces of heaven on earth." And his comments stuck with me. So a few weeks later, I asked another Indian friend about what he'd said. And apparently he was paraphrasing a Sanskrit phrase that goes, "Mother and motherland are higher than heaven." And I've never forgotten that conversation, not because I agreed or disagreed necessarily, because honestly, I felt like I was screwed. My mother wasn't exactly the most maternal of people, and I didn't have a deep attachment to my homeland. So where did that leave me? I'm Angela. I lived overseas for about 30 years across 11 different countries, raised 2 children. I'm now repatriated, been through an expat divorce and a cancer diagnosis, and I'm here to talk honestly about all of it. So let's talk about belonging. Following that conversation and many others, this idea of belonging has fascinated me for years, both for myself and for my children. And we don't have to rely on ancient texts to talk about this because psychologists have been studying it for decades. And there is so much to unpack. Now, as you may or may not know about me yet, childhood and youth development is my deepest passion. So the work of American psychologist Abraham Maslow is always on my reading list. And Maslow was very clear. Belonging is a fundamental need, not a luxury, not a nice to have. It's an actual need, right up there with safety and survival. And here's a little bit of information for you. That triangle that we always talk about when we talk about Maslow, he apparently hated that thing. So I'm definitely going to do a video on that one day soon. Anyway, there I was, no real connection to my homeland, a very complicated relationship with my mother. So basically missing 2 of the key ingredients for living a good life and fulfilling my potential. Brilliant. It did make me wonder though, is the reason that I've never felt like I belonged anywhere actually less about my expat experience and more about my childhood? Or maybe it's just a bit of both. Now, you may have also heard of Brené Brown. She's very famous for her research on vulnerability and shame and courage. And she talks a lot about belonging. And one thing she says about belonging that's really interesting is that the opposite of belonging is not belonging. It's actually fitting in. And they are not the same thing. Fitting in means changing yourself so people will accept you, which is honestly something that expats become incredibly good at. But here's the thing, the moment you become who someone else wants you to be, just to feel included, you stop belonging anywhere. Because it's not really you that belongs. And that's why you'll always hear me say that expats often feel like they belong everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. So true belonging, according to Brené Brown, means showing up as your authentic self. And I find that so interesting and true in many ways. But if I'm honest, I find it a lot more complex than that. Because in so many of the places I've lived, that's just not how belonging works. What I've noticed is that it seems like the culture that you grow up in shapes what belonging feels like to you. So if you grow up in a community-centered culture, belonging isn't something you even need to go looking for. It's just there. It's your family and your community and your history and your ancestors. So that gentleman in India wasn't questioning his sense of belonging for a single second. It was as certain to him as the ground he was standing on. So if you didn't grow up in a community-centered culture like myself, belonging is something that you go out and build for yourself, which sounds and feels quite liberating actually, until you move country every few years and have to start all over again with each move. And then come the children, expat children, or third culture children as they're often known. They grow up across multiple countries and cultures, picking up little bits everywhere that they live. So their sense of belonging doesn't fit neatly into one category. And honestly, I think that's one of the most discombobulating aspects of expat life. and the one thing that doesn't get talked about enough. Because what moving around the world does for us and our children is force that question of belonging. So if you grew up in one place for most of your childhood, you probably don't even think much about it. But as expats, we do start to think about what belonging actually means. I never felt like I belonged even as a child. So in a way, the expat life actually gave me the opportunity to search for that sense of belonging, to keep looking, to think maybe it's out there somewhere, maybe the next country or the next community or the next chapter of my life will give me that sense of belonging. But Brene Brown would say, and I think she's right about this, belonging isn't out there. It's an inside job. And in all honesty, it took me a long time to really understand that. Since leaving the expat world, having some distance from that environment, going through my divorce, getting through my cancer treatment, I've had the most incredible gift. And that is the chance to leave behind every person and every place where I was just fitting in, where I was in some ways performing a version of myself, like the Madonna effect, that wasn't really me. And now my approach to life is very simple. I go where I can be most myself. That's it. That's the whole thing. So I want to leave you with a few questions to ponder. When you think about belonging, does it feel like something you find or something you build? Has the expat life made belonging easier for you or more complicated? And most importantly, when was the last time you were somewhere or with someone where you felt completely, unapologetically yourself? I would love to hear your story. So drop it in the comments below, because if there's one thing I know, it's that everyone's experience is unique and worth sharing. Thanks so much for joining me wherever you are in the world, and I will see you next time. Gotta drink my coffee.